Next, we would like to invite up Michelle Chadwick. Michelle is the founder of Hypersomnolence Australia, the chairperson for Sleep Disorders Australia, and the curator of this Idiopathic Hypersomnia and Narcolepsy Education Day. Michelle is also living with idiopathic hypersomnia. Please welcome Michelle Chadwick.
Where's the go button? Well, after listening to Fiona's presentation, the first thing that came to mind was just how different mine's going to be. And the reason for that is that we do not have the same condition. But people with idiopathic hypersomnia get treated like we have narcolepsy. So I think the most important thing that will come out of hearing what I have to say, as opposed to hearing what Fiona said, is just how different these experiences are. So I hope that the doctors that are here today and those that will be watching the video really pick up that difference and know how important it is to people with idiopathic hypersomnia to be identified as such and not as a condition they don't have. Okay. Public speaking absolutely does not come easy to me. I never intended to create a platform for myself. I do what I do because someone needed to stick up for a disorder, what researchers themselves call a neglected disorder. When I started out 10 years ago, I had two choices. I could have done something or I could have done nothing. If I had any idea how hard it was going to be, I'll be honest, I probably would have done nothing. But I didn't, and a decade on, I'm still passionate and determined to make a difference. People often ask me what sparked my passion and determination. Meeting someone else with idiopathic hypersomnia for the first time changed me. Jess is half my age. I saw my 23-year-old self in her and I knew I needed to do something. I didn't want young people like Jess to have to go down the same bumpy road that people my age with IH had travelled. It's important for health professionals to know that my story is not unique within the IH community. It's actually quite common. My friend Amanda, who also has IH, once asked me, how many people diagnosed with IH do you think you've spoken to, as in had a meaningful conversation with? I'd never thought about that before. My thoughts skimmed through the last 10 plus years of connections with people with IH. I started the Idiopathic Hypersomnia Australia Facebook group in 2012. I then established the IH Patient Registry, which is Australia's only record of people diagnosed with IH. There are approximately 700 people on that registry. I've met and had conversations with many of them and their families too. I created the Worldwide Idiopathic Hypersomnia Awareness Week in 2013, which connected me with people from all over the world. I started the Living with Idiopathic Hypersomnia communities in Australia and New Zealand, the US, Canada, Europe and UK. I also have IH friends in South America and Japan who I regularly chat with. I helped Fiona set up the Living with Narcolepsy support group too. The answer to Amanda's question was many hundreds of people. I realised that I'd had more meaningful conversations with people diagnosed with IH and narcolepsy than any doctor in Australia will probably ever have. My journey started many years ago. I first noticed the symptoms that would consume the rest of my life when I was in my first year of high school. I was 11, 40 long years ago. Due to my apparent scholastic abilities, my parents were told I'd been offered a place in a private school. Only recently my mum said that the reason I turned it down was because I felt strongly about the public school system, which does sound like me, but I suspect that my decision had more to do with my struggles. I probably knew that the state school system was going to be a lot easier for me to manage. It turns out that this was probably true because what I got away with during my school years would never have flied in a private school. I was often late to school. I slept through multiple alarm clocks. My brother, who was always pedantic about getting to school on time, would often frantically wake me as he dashed out the door. There was never any time for breakfast. I barely brushed my hair In winter, I would sleep in part of my school uniform so that when I did finally drag myself out of bed, all I had to do was throw a tunic over my head, slip my shoes on. I literally had shoes with no laces on purpose, grab my bag and rush out the door, still in a sleep-drunken haze. My struggle in the mornings was despite long, deep sleep the night before. In fact, I was never without adequate sleep. I slept every opportunity I got. I slept during lessons. I would skip class and sleep in the library. I slept when I got home from school. And I would still sleep another 9 to 10 hours overnight. But I never felt awake. Life never got any easier after school. Adulting is tough for people with IH, right? Because we're expected to behave like everyone else. The average person wakes up, then gets ready for school or work. Some people may have a family that they need to get ready as well. They attend school or work or social engagements. They interact with family and friends and participate in sports and hobbies. These are all very normal things that are expected of anyone, right? But people with IH have difficulties with all of these things all day, every day. I faked my way through my teenage years, and now I was beginning the long journey of faking my way through adulthood. I've spent my entire life trying to participate like normal people, and the whole time I was a wreck inside. People with IH will know what I mean, right? I often failed at it too, because nothing changed. Instead of being late for school, I was now late for work. In fact, some days I didn't wake up until lunchtime, and I would only be awake briefly before falling back to sleep for the rest of the day. I would then sleep again that night, fronting up to work the next day after not ringing in sick the day before, had me full of anxiety. And it happened a lot. Needless to say, I had a lot of jobs when I was younger. A lot of them very important ones too. But the struggle to stop sleeping, to wake up and to stay awake was intense and relentless. In 40 odd years, I have had absolutely no reprieve. I don't know what it feels like to be awake, but I'm certain this is not it. Waking up is the hardest thing I do every day, and I know this is the case for others too. This is a severe and disabling symptom of IH, which is often neglected by doctors. In the words of Dr. Isabelle, sleep inertia is a frequent and disabling symptom in IH, but it is often underestimated by physicians. In IH, sleep inertia may be severe and long-lasting and is sometimes associated with confusion, disorientation and clumsiness, i.e. sleep drunkenness. The sleep drunkenness may be more problematic than the excessive daytime sleepiness. So what is sleep inertia and sleep drunkenness? Sleep inertia refers to the transitional state between sleep and wake. It is marked by impaired performance, reduced vigilance, and the desire to return to sleep. Its effects may last minutes or several hours. Some people feel like it lasts all day. In simple terms, sleep inertia is when you find it extremely difficult to wake up. People with severe sleep inertia sometimes sleep through multiple alarms and will typically fall back to sleep several times involuntarily. They often require humans to physically wake them and to make sure they stay awake. People with IH who have sleep inertia usually experience it every time they wake up, both in the morning and when taking naps. Sleep drunkenness manifests as confusion, disorientation, poor motor coordination and slowness. People with sleep drunkenness may say irrational or unintentional things, then have no memory of doing so later. Their speech may be slow or slurred. They may be clumsy, such as dropping things, walking into doorways or bouncing off walls, and these are things that I experience every time I wake up. Some people report drunkenness lasting as much as 4 hours or more, which is why it can be more problematic than the daytime sleepiness that is experienced in IH. Difficulty awaking from sleep is common in healthy people, especially in adolescents. Sleep inertia is also not uncommon in several medical conditions. While regular healthy people and people with medical conditions, including other sleep disorders, may experience sleep inertia or confusional arousals, IH researchers suggest that the extreme difficulty waking up and sleep drunkenness seen in people with IH is typically much more severe than which occurs in other individuals. Extreme difficulty waking up and sleep drunkenness have been noted as highly specific in IH, as clear-cut sleep drunkenness is not found in controls. That's a quote from me as well. Research suggests that the reason people with other sleep disorders and even otherwise healthy people experience difficulty waking up and confusion at awaking is likely due to poor quality sleep or lack of sleep. It is important to understand that people with IH do not have poor quality or insufficient sleep. In fact, studies show that people with IH have higher quality of sleep or longer duration, with a tendency towards more slow wave sleep than healthy people do. This suggests that the underlying cause of sleep inertia and sleep drunkenness in IH may not be the same as other individuals. The take-home message for doctors is that some people with IH experience a form of sleep inertia and sleep drunkenness that they may not have seen before. So please don't assume that it's anything that you've seen in other disorders. Don't brush it off as something that is insignificant. Waking up is the first thing that humans need to do every day. A good start to the day is important as it sets you up for the rest of the day. So please remember, some people with IH have an absolutely horrendous start to every day. Along with the constant need for sleep and the dreadful process of trying to wake up and stay awake, I also struggle with the deterioration of my cognitive abilities. Anyone, including doctors, who thinks that IH is simply feeling sleepy during the day doesn't understand IH. Idiopathic hypersomnia is more than just sleepiness. Cognitive ability is defined as a general mental capability involving reasoning, problem solving, planning, abstract thinking, complex idea comprehension, and learning from experience. People with IH can struggle with all of that. We lose track of time, get distracted easily, have poor memory recall, and experience difficulty expressing and understanding verbal communication, all of which can cause us to feel frustrated and irritable. Even noise, and it doesn't have to be loud, just people talking can be too much to cope with. My IH friends and I know all too well what too much peopling means today. Not if you agree, right? Yeah, too much. To the loved ones here today with people with IH, please don't take it personally. Sometimes withdrawing ourselves from whatever is going on around us is the only way we can cope. Most people experience feeling tired, fatigued, and excessively sleepy, particularly when they do not get enough sleep. That's different. What's different for people with idiopathic hypersomnia is that they experience extreme sleepiness despite getting adequate or typically more than adequate hours of sleep. This sleep is typically deep and uninterrupted, but it is not refreshing. Despite extraordinary amounts of good quality sleep, people with IH are in a constant state of sleepiness. I always knew I wasn't normal. As a teenager and young adult, I was easily the most determined person I knew. If I could have overcome the extreme difficulty I had waking up and the need for excessive sleep, I know I would have. I knew that if everyone felt like I did, the whole world would literally stop functioning the way it does. That is how significant the symptoms of IH can be. They certainly were for me. It took 20 years. It took 20 years to find a doctor who could get their head around the severity of my pleas for help. I'm always tired. I sleep a lot. I can't wake up and I can't stay awake. When my sleep specialist told me I had idiopathic hypersomnia and explained what it was, I couldn't believe that I'd finally found someone after all these years who knew and understood so well what I'd been experiencing for so long, and it had a name. That diagnosis took 20 long years, but my relief and positivity was short-lived. My doctor told me there was no cure for IH. He warned me that the only medication available didn't treat the cause and had potentially unpleasant side effects, which prevented some people from taking it at all. Oh, and if it did work, I could build up a tolerance to it over time, which may cause it to stop working. There were no support groups and no organisations anywhere in the world that represented IH. So there wasn't anywhere I could go to for more information and advice. Great. So I had a name for the disorder I had and medication that may help, but if it did help, it may stop working. And that was it. That was literally it. Rather than get depressed, which under the circumstances was difficult to fight, I set out to change all that. To change it, not for me, but for those who came after me. Nothing I've done or continue to do will change my lived experience. My hope is that what I do will help others. I don't want one more person to have to travel the same rocky road that other people with IH my age has had to travel. Acceptance. This is the best part of my story, because although my life has not been the best, I'm living my best life now, and it's all due to acceptance. Acceptance can be defined as actively embracing the experience of thoughts, feelings and bodily sensations and allowing them to come and go without struggling with them. Acceptance can be something that many of us don't even realise we need to do. But I can assure you that until you accept your situation and live your life accordingly, the people around you will find it difficult to reach that level of acceptance you expect and need from them. This is important, so I'll say it again. Until you accept your situation and live your life accordingly, the people around you will find it difficult to reach the level of acceptance you expect and need from them. I am the happiest I've ever been in my life, but it hasn't come without struggle to get to this point. Some time ago, I realised I had to stop fighting against what I had no control over. In doing so, it allowed me to be the best person my brain and body is capable of being, rather than continuing to have unrealistic expectations. I honestly don't know how I knew what I needed to do to turn my life around, but I'm guessing it came about through desperation. I'd hit rock bottom. My symptoms had become so difficult to manage, I naturally assumed that my idiopathic hypersomnia had gotten worse. So I started by looking into what may have caused it to progress. Much to my surprise, I found that the research suggests IH reaches a peak in young adulthood and remains stable. That is, it doesn't get worse. So why was I struggling more than ever? Why did I find some days, some weeks or months more difficult than others? I spoke to and read the comments of hundreds of people diagnosed with IH. I spoke to doctors and other healthcare professionals, including clinicians and scientists that have studied IH for decades. What I found is that aside from people who have other medical and or other psychological conditions which can account for their symptoms, the most likely reason IH can appear to have worsened is because the person's ability to manage their symptoms is compromised by other external factors that they're not taking into consideration. This was certainly the case for me. Let me explain. We know that chronic stress can have a huge impact on cognitive function. We also know that people with chronic illness are at a greater risk of developing depression and anxiety, and that this too impacts how well someone with idiopathic hypersomnia manages their symptoms. But just how significant can that stress be for someone with IH? As I mentioned earlier, for someone with IH, every morning is a struggle. Once they're awake, they're expected to stay awake all day despite an overwhelming and insatiable need for sleep. And that's irrespective of how much good quality sleep they've had. There is no reprieve from that sleepiness. The challenge is never ending. But all too often, this constant struggle is compounded by both the expectations of others and the expectations which people with IH place on themselves. Can you imagine what that would be like day in and day out for years and years? Many people with idiopathic hypersomnia go without even knowing they have a neurological disorder that is responsible for what they experience. They have no excuse to offer those that criticise them. Then they get diagnosed, but with a condition which is often misunderstood by even the medical profession. It isn't recognised appropriately in many parts of the world, including Australia. This diagnosis quite often ends up creating more questions than answers. The stress that this can cause is enormous, and quite often, not surprisingly, it results in depression and anxiety. This stress is chronic, and its effects are damaging and long-lasting. I'm 50. I've been living with IH for 40 years. It took over 20 years to be diagnosed. 20 long years of constant criticism and judgment from both myself and others. I wanted many things in life, and I tried so hard to work towards them. Not achieving my goals wasn't something that I accepted lightly. But then I also had to face the judgment of others. On top of that were the numerous medical tests and doctor's appointments to endure, and the subsequent judgment which came from many of those doctors too. When someone is considered a hypochondriac often enough, it's not hard to understand how they may start to believe it, but not me. I have a drive and determination that I just didn't see in many of the people in my life. So why was I so hard on myself? I don't know exactly. But I do know that there was a lot of pressure on me to be normal. I certainly knew that being normal would have made my life a whole lot easier. Perhaps subconsciously I pushed myself beyond what I knew my brain and body was capable of, because I was just so desperate for a normal life. I expected more of myself. Within a few years of diagnosis, after spending the entire time trying to understand idiopathic hypersomnia, I finally realised that I had to accept my situation and work with it, not against it. But it was by no means an easy road to that realisation. I'm a wife and a mum of 2 children who were toddlers when I was diagnosed. I was working full-time, mostly from home due to my condition, plus I did a lot of charity work. I'm not going to lie. Externally, everything may have looked okay, but it wasn't. I was a mess. When I wasn't asleep, I was struggling to wake up and to stay awake so that I could do everything that normal people do. I resented the pressure of this and the demands of life. It made me angry. I cried and I screamed. My marriage was hanging by a thread. Hell, my insanity was hanging by a thread. And if that wasn't bad enough, my symptoms were now harder than ever to manage. I had a diagnosis and I had medication too, yet neither of them changed my situation much at all. What changed was me. And when I did, my whole life changed for the better. There wasn't one specific thing which was my light bulb moment for change. What I'm verbalising now didn't exist back then in the context of idiopathic hypersomnia. There were no words written then by other people with idiopathic hypersomnia to tell me that it was okay to give in, to surrender, or as I like to say, accept my situation. There was nothing which explained how chronic stress, depression and anxiety would make my symptoms much more difficult to manage, but I now know they do. Miracle cures aside, idiopathic hypersomnia is a lifelong disorder. It does not magically disappear. That doesn't mean that the current treatments on offer won't help. Rather, the underlying problem is not going to disappear. It is okay to mourn the loss of who we were prior to the onset of IH. In fact, it's necessary. It is okay to grieve for who or what we had hoped to be, but we need to accept that we will never be that person again. Acceptance allows us to move forward and be grateful when treatments do work. It allows us to start building a life that is suited to our condition. It allows us to create our version of normal and to live a life that is free of unrealistic goals and expectations. We can replace self-criticism and struggle with revised goals and more appropriate expectations. It also frees us from guilt and shame that so many of us feel, and that alone has a huge impact on how much happier and brighter our futures will be. Take-home messages for health professionals with idiopathic hypersomnia patients. The relief patients may experience when diagnosed with IH, the confirmation that they have a genuine disorder is typically short-lived. I think that's a really important thing for doctors to remember, because quite often patients will get their diagnosis and walk out the room and the doctor thinks that's it. And the patient hopes that that's it. That's usually where their journey begins. Prepare your patient for this and help them to manage their expectations. Your support may include a variety of resources such as follow-up appointments, a referral to a counsellor or a psychologist, community groups and services, fact sheets, credible online resources and patient support groups. Encourage them to educate and help themselves throughout their journey. Be honest about medication that you have prescribed for them. Clarify expectations, limitations and side effects. Remember, medication is designed to help manage some of the symptoms. It's not intended to make symptoms disappear. Chronic stress, depression and anxiety will make IH symptoms more difficult to manage. Please acknowledge and validate this, then work with your patient and support them. Discuss with them the impact their condition or treatment may have on driving or operating machinery and their reporting obligations within your state or territory. Help them navigate whether their disorder affects the safety of themselves and others on the roads and in the workplace. Support your patients as they navigate the inevitable challenges and how their disorder will impact work, study, having a family and their relationships. The best way to manage idiopathic hypersomnia is with a holistic approach. Discuss a care plan with your patient. Explain to them what it is and how it can help them. Finally, thank you to everyone who has ever donated to Hypersomnolence Australia. Your support has ensured that there is an organisation for IH, a place for people to go to for information and support. It also ensures that there is a place for doctors to refer to for information. Our information is unique. We are guided by medical professionals, but also share patients' lived experiences, which is invaluable to a well-rounded educational experience for medical professionals. I would like to specifically thank Amanda, Ellen, and also Tiffany, who has been a generous supporter of Hypersomnolence Australia for many years. Your support does not go unnoticed. I would also like to express my sincere gratitude to all of the clinicians, researchers who have assisted me along the way. I appreciate the time that each of them has given me, particularly Ron and David, to assist my knowledge and understanding of narcolepsy and hypersomnia, and particularly idiopathic hypersomnia. If you haven't already done so, please visit the Hypersomnolence Australia website. You can join the patient registry, read the many fact sheets and resources, become a supporter and make a donation if we have helped you in some way. You can follow us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. Join the Facebook group and chat with others, or join our monthly Living with Idiopathic Hypersomnia catch-up. In closing, thank you all, the IH and narcolepsy community. Thank you for attending today. I hope that you will take home messages which both educate and inspire you. Thank you.